All right, let's jump right in. Take a second and just look around you. I want you to try and imagine your day completely devoid of printed words. No books on your shelves, no labels on your morning coffee, no street signs, no calendars. It's actually incredibly hard for us to picture a world without print, mainly because we just take it completely for granted. But print has this wild, fascinating history, a history that literally shaped the modern world. So welcome to this explainer where we're going to unpack exactly how that happened.
Here is our roadmap for the explainer today. We're starting with a world without print. Then we'll uncover the Asian print pioneers, follow print as it travels to Europe, dig into Gutenberg's big breakthrough, and finally look at the massive impact of this revolution.
So, part 1, a world without print.
To really get why this tech was such a game changer, we have to go back to a time when information was basically trapped. Imagine a 16th century royal workshop. Long before mechanical printing ever arrived in places like India, books were made through sheer grueling manual labor. You'd have one person dictating a text, another carefully writing it all out by hand, and yet another meticulously hand-painting the illustrations. Now, this art of calligraphy produced absolute masterpieces. Gorgeous? Absolutely. Fast? Not a chance. The circulation of human knowledge was quite literally capped by human speed.
Which brings us to part 2, the Asian print pioneers.
Okay, let's clear up a massive misconception right off the bat. A lot of people think print started in Europe. Not true. The earliest print tech was actually developed much further east. The timeline here is just staggering. As early as 594 AD, books in China were being printed by rubbing paper against inked carved woodblocks. By 768 AD, Chinese Buddhist missionaries had brought this tech over to Japan. And by the 14th century, Korea was producing the Jikji, a text on Zen Buddhism using movable metal type. In China, the sheer scale of printing was driven by the imperial state itself. They had this huge bureaucratic system, so they were printing vast numbers of textbooks just to prep candidates for civil service exams.
To put that kind of effort into perspective, look at the Tripitaka Koreana. It's a mid-13th century collection of Buddhist scriptures. To create this one collection, skilled craftsmen had to engrave roughly 80,000 individual woodblocks. 80,000! Just imagine the sheer, painstaking dedication required to carve tens of thousands of blocks purely to preserve and share knowledge. It is absolutely breathtaking.
But it wasn't all just rigid religious texts like the Diamond Sutra from 868 AD. Over time, print beautifully diversified. As urban culture bloomed, print shifted with it. By the late 18th century in Edo, which is modern-day Tokyo, you start seeing vibrant ukiyo, or pictures of the floating world. Print wasn't just for scholar officials anymore, you know? It became a fun leisure activity for city dwellers, full of romantic plays, poetry, and these elegant depictions of tea house culture.
All right, part 3, print travels to Europe.
So, this knowledge of woodblock printing didn't just stay in Asia. It traveled, quite literally, along the Silk Road, and it was about to flip the European continent upside down. In 1295, the famous explorer Marco Polo returned to Italy from China, bringing this woodblock know-how with him. Now, Europe at the time was deeply divided. On one side, you had the elites with luxury handwritten editions on vellum, which is this incredibly expensive parchment made from animal skin. These aristocratic circles literally scoffed at printed books as cheap vulgarities. But on the flip side, you had this cheaper printed paper that merchants and university students were absolutely desperate for. They just wanted access to information.
And the demand for books in Europe? It just exploded. To give you an idea of how crazy things got before the printing press, a single bookseller would often have to hire more than 50 scribes at a time just to keep up with the demand for handwritten copies. It was laborious, it was slow, and it was expensive. The math just wasn't working anymore. A major mechanical breakthrough wasn't just a nice-to-have, it was desperately needed.
Enter part 4, Gutenberg's printing press breakthrough.
So it's the 1430s in Strasbourg, Germany, and Johann Gutenberg steps up to the plate. Gutenberg was a brilliant synthesizer. He basically looked at tools that already existed and mashed them up into something world-changing. Growing up on an agricultural estate, he was super familiar with olive presses, so that heavy pressing mechanism became his base model. But he also happened to be a master goldsmith, so he knew exactly how to create delicate lead molds. By combining the muscle of an agricultural screw press with the finesse of metal casting, boom, he created the first known printing press.
The real magic here, the absolute core of his invention, was movable type. Instead of carving an entire page out of one giant static block of wood, Gutenberg cast individual metal types for each of the 26 characters of the Roman alphabet. You could just move these little metal letters around to compose totally different words and pages. Because of this one tweak, his machine could print 250 sheets on one side per hour. It was a colossal leap in efficiency.
By 1448, his system was humming along, and his first big project was the Bible. He cranked out about 180 copies, which took him 3 years. Now, I know 3 years sounds agonizingly slow to us today, but let's be real. By the standards of the 1440s, producing 180 complete Bibles in that time frame was warp speed.
Here's a really fun fact, though. Early printed books didn't instantly look like modern paperbacks. To appeal to those wealthy elites who loved the unique look of handwritten manuscripts, Gutenberg's metal letters were actually designed to imitate ornamental handwriting. Printers would literally leave blank spaces on the pages so buyers could hire artists to come in and hand-paint custom borders with vines and colors. Because of this finishing touch, no two copies of the Gutenberg Bible were exactly alike. Pretty wild, right?
And finally, Part 5, Impact of the Print Revolution.
The societal ripple effect of all this was just explosive. In the second half of the 15th century, 20 million copies of printed books flooded the European markets. By the 16th century, that number skyrocketed to an unbelievable 200 million copies. The time and labor required to make a book totally plummeted, which means the cost of knowledge completely dropped. Just like that, a brand new reading public was born. But wait, there was a catch. The literacy rate in Europe was still really low. So how do you sell printed books to a bunch of people who can't read? Well, printers were clever. They started publishing these heavily illustrated popular ballads and folk tales. The idea was that these books would be taken to village gatherings and taverns, where they'd be sung and read out loud to the commoners. So rather than replacing oral culture, reading culture and oral culture just beautifully blurred together.
And this shift in how people consumed information is exactly why this was a true revolution. As our source points out, it transformed the lives of people, changing their relationship to information and knowledge and with institutions and authorities. This tidal wave of new ideas meant the authorities could no longer control what people knew. It opened up fresh perspectives and even sparked massive, history-altering religious debates, like when Martin Luther's printed writings went viral, kicking off the Protestant Reformation.
Which leaves us with a final thought to wrap up this explainer. Authorities throughout history have always feared print. And that's because it made them lose their monopoly on information. The printing press absolutely shattered the gates of knowledge. What you should really take away from this is that technology has always driven how we think and who holds the power. So if the printing press broke the monopoly on knowledge centuries ago, what modern technologies do you think are continuing that exact same revolution today? Think about it.